Hi, Amira. Welcome. I'm so glad this worked out for all of us.
Thanks so much.
I'm just going to do a quick sort of discussion on what Bill 21 is, but I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit about sort of where this all started, and I'll also highlight what recently happened. So earlier this week, most Canadians sort of became aware of Bill 21, not this week. Time makes no sense anymore. Sometime last week or the week before, there was a young woman who was removed from her teaching position at a school in Quebec, not because she wasn't a good teacher, not because she did something inappropriate, or not because, like she didn't have the credentials to teach, but rather because she was practicing her faith by wearing her hijab, which, like, can we just sit with how utterly bullshit that is? Like, I feel like there needs to be a pause because it's such trash. Boils my blood, as I'm sure it does for most people who heard about it. What was increasingly difficult to hear is that this was based on a law. It was totally legal that she was removed from her teaching post because they passed a law, which is a whole different conversation on how laws are not necessarily ethical or fair or just. But before we hop into any of that, let's talk about, let's maybe talk a little bit about the history of this issue and how this bill passed. It wasn't just passed, but yeah, maybe one of you could start with that.
Amira, I think you should touch upon that if you're comfortable.
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Sam. It's good to see you, Tabassum. Thanks so much for having this conversation with all of the followers for One Canada. Yeah, I mean, look, this bill passed 2 years ago. It is a popular bill in Quebec. The issue around religious minorities has long been a bit of a contentious one in that province. There is a history there where, at one point decades ago, the Catholic Church had this hugely oppressive sort of influence on society, the Quiet Revolution. And so up until now, up until this moment, there's tension between the practice of religious minorities and the broader society. And unfortunately, politicians have oftentimes sort of leaned into that tension instead of talking about the importance of protecting and preserving our freedom of religion, freedom of expression, the cornerstones of a democracy. They've leaned into it and sort of used this idea of laïcité or secularism to justify the infringement on people's rights. And so this bill, when it was passed, they knew it was going to be seen, and indeed legally seen, as an infringement on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as Quebec's own human rights charter. And so they used the notwithstanding clause to sort of, curtail that. And this most recent example with Fatima Anvari, it's the first time that we actually see someone lose their job because of what they're wearing. But make no mistake, this has been having an impact on religious minorities in that province, not just visibly Muslim women, but Sikh communities, Jewish communities, who have had to make this really awful choice between practicing their faith or, pursuing the profession of their dreams. So it's just, brought us to a really horrible place, but a lot of attention to see how discriminatory this kind of law can exist now, 2021 in Canada.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. And I think, so I'm not Muslim, but I think for those of us who saw the terrorist attack in London, Ontario, where, a family was murdered and there was all this noise about, we got to make Canada better, we can't do this. And then I know, like, I said this to a friend and they were like, well, it's not directly related. Like, one happened here and one happened here. I'm like, no, but you build this sentiment. You build this sentiment of, like, discrimination and racism and, like, bad and negative energy that, like, builds towards someone committing a heinous crime like that.
Yep.
So while for the people watching this, I hope, like, let's not frame it as like a Quebec issue, or let's not frame it as like a teacher losing her job, although that in and of itself should be enough. Let's also take ourselves back to that moment after that terrorist attack where we reminded ourselves how important it was to show up for communities that are disproportionately affected, and discriminated against and have hate crimes committed against them. Like, it has to start from that solidarity perspective as you listen to this conversation, because this is about human rights. It's not really about politics, although there are political implications.
Of course.
So this isn't an issue that just affects communities of color, but it does disproportionately affect them. Why a lot of the commentary we've sort of seen online is that, like, oh, but it affects like Christians and Jewish people as well, with the assumption that both those groups are white. Obviously that's not true. So it's not like anti like Muslim, or it's not Islamophobic in nature. And I've been trying to find the language around why that's not necessarily true. Do either of you have those words?
Well, I mean, we know that this bill does target Muslim women disproportionately because it prohibits the wearing of religious attire, and that is the hijab. However, it does affect other marginalized groups too. They can't wear the kippah, and Sikh people cannot wear the turban. But specifically speaking from a Muslim perspective, it's targeting the religious group, our religious group, and wearing the hijab. So we saw that Fatima Anbari was removed from her teaching position, which is a publicly facing job, and she was reassigned to a job where she won't be in front of children. And I think that's so problematic, because they're also like, it's not just about our generation, it's also about the upcoming generation. What are the students going to be learning? That, oh, our teacher who wears the hijab, she can't be a teacher, and maybe like we're forming their judgments in their future of saying that perhaps people who wear the hijab aren't good people. Perhaps they're not fit to teach, and that's absolutely not true. So there's a lot behind this bill that we all have to think about, and we all have to speak up about, because this goes against the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And because this notwithstanding clause was invoked, we're really thinking, if this happened in this situation, what's stopping politicians from invoking it in any other situation? Like right now, our rights are being infringed upon. What's stopping them from infringing upon other groups' rights in the future?
Definitely. And I guess, like, why is talking about secularism code for racism? Like, because I think they've packaged it in this like racist long game, right? Because it's those young minds and that generations that will come that will be, like you were saying, influenced around this idea that, you know, they won't see a police officer wearing a hijab, they won't see a lawyer in a turban, they won't, like, all of these, that's what they'll start to see in the world. And they're claiming this is, like, you know, creating a secular society, but it feels hella racist to me. Like, I don't know, can we explore that a little bit more? Because I think that's something that people are going back and forth on, and how that relates to the culture of Quebec and why we should respect it, which, don't get me started on how come we have to respect that, but not respect people's like religious freedoms. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's such a good point that you raised. Look, secularism as a concept, all of us support that. We all believe that we shouldn't live in a country where one religion is being imposed on all of us. That we should have, the government should ensure that there is the freedom of that religious sort of influence of the government, but it shouldn't be misinterpreted to mean that freedom of other people's religious practice, right? So it's almost, unfortunately, well, it is definitely going, unfortunately, too far in terms of, not only is it saying, well, the state should be neutral. Absolutely, the state should be neutral, and that's what we expect. Although, come on, like, we know that Canada, first of all, stole the right of Indigenous people and Indigenous folk here, Inuit and Métis, to practice their own faith. So let's not make a mistake that this is not actually a habit of telling communities that are not Judeo-Christian generally to be able to practice their faith. We have that history right here in Canada, unfortunately. So it's not new in that sense. But then going forward is that we know that there is that privileging of Christian foundations. We're about to, you know, all have holiday for Christmas. Okay, so the Ontario Human Rights Commission has called this systemic faithism, where you actually see the privileging of one religion over another. So this is part of our society that we are always navigating. But what the point is that when you take it one step far in telling people that they themselves cannot practice their faith, that leads to a real distortion of that concept of secularism. And yes, Sam, what you said is absolutely true. It becomes used then as a way to be racist, unfortunately. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It doesn't matter what the intention is of the law. What matters is the outcome, is the consequence. And even a Superior Court judge in Quebec looking at this law said the consequences here are cruel and dehumanizing. So that's from a Quebec looking at this. So the main mistake, this idea of secularism has been taken one step too far. And absolutely what Tabassum said about, you know, who's next, whose rights are going to be curtailed next. All of us should be extremely concerned that once we start to give up some of our rights and say, well, it's that community or that community, it's not affecting me, we're going down a very slippery slope.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
And I think, you know, we did get a lot of comments from people DMing us from Quebec saying that, because in our post we talked about how, you know, this is something that's popular in Quebec and all of that, but we've been getting a lot of feedback on people saying that this isn't something that they want, that they don't understand why this is legal in Quebec. Could we talk maybe a little bit about what people living in Quebec can do, and then what Canadians can do, and then we can go to what isn't being done by our Canadian leadership?
Yeah, so I think it's really important that Quebecers speak up. I read somewhere that stated that about 3 million Quebecers do not agree with this bill. And those 3 million people really need to step it up right now and email their MLAs, email their MPPs, rally, get awareness on this issue, make some noise. I think that's going to be really important. I want to tell all your followers here that this is a provincial law. So it's very important that the Quebecers listening in today really target their provincial government, make some noise, sign petitions. There's a few petitions out there. Our organization has a petition available on our website. I can share that with Sam and she can share that afterwards. Actually, I think it's already on.
It's already in our link in bio, yeah.
It's already in your link. Yeah, I think creating awareness is very important. I know journalist Fariha Naqvi Mohammed is also very passionate about this topic. She is raising awareness through her articles that she writes. So I think that's very important that we support people who are raising their voice right now. Amira, do you have any other tips?
Yeah, no, look, I think that if anything can be learned from what we've seen in the past little while since the story of Fatima came out, is that regular folks can and absolutely have a voice here, and we cannot sort of, you know, let the day-to-day life kind of get, you know, overwhelming and forget that we have each of us a responsibility to stand up for one another. I mean, it's just so important. And one thing, when I talked to one of the parents that was organizing the rally in Chelsea, Amy Pictelli, she said to me, you know, I remember reading about this bill, but it just, you know, I cared, I was upset about it, but I just got caught up in the day-to-day. And you heard that from other parents as well. And all of a sudden it was their school and it was their children who all of a sudden don't have another teacher. This is the second teacher that this third grade class has lost in the past few months. They were really excited to have Miss Anvari there as their teacher. I mean, many of you have seen this viral card now that one of the third grade students had written for her, calling her the best teacher ever, that, you know, your hijab is awesome and it's unfair that you can teach. I mean, it's so heartwarming. But just like I think Sam and Tabassum, you both pointed out, like, what kind of society are we creating if this is the signal that the adults, and I put that on purpose in quotation marks, are creating basically a two-tier system where, you know, a little girl with a turban is going to be told by her family, don't consider a career in teaching if you want to stay in Quebec with us, with your family, because you won't be able to be who you want to be in this province. And it's just mind-boggling. So yes, each and every one of us should look for opportunities to engage. This, you know, Sam, again, thanks for inviting us to have this discussion on Insta with you. All of these are ways to just keep pushing and saying, no, we're not going to stand for racism, you know, systemic racism, you know, writ large.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to thank me or the account for doing something like this. That's the point of it, is to create space for conversations like this and invite more people into this. I feel sort of at a loss as someone who's not from, I mean, I was born in Quebec, but I don't live there right now. So I don't know how to get in touch with someone. I don't know what to do. So what I've been paying a lot of attention to is what politicians outside of Quebec have been saying, like federal party leaders. I think they've all said like, this is a bad bill, but they haven't done anything about it. And that's, I think it took me a while to sit with that and like process that, like, oh, so we're saying this violates charter rights and that sucks, but oh well. I mean, that's kind of the sentiment I was getting off of all of their responses. Like, why? It's violating someone's rights. Isn't that like, I mean, it feels like we should be doing a lot more than just like condemning them on Twitter. Like, that just, I mean, I know if it was my rights that were being violated, I would be screaming it at the top of my lungs and looking for every way to get it to be fixed. I feel like if you represent the country, you should be doing more. Why aren't our federal leaders doing more?
Yeah, so I'll share a little bit, and then maybe Amira can share her perspective. But I do believe that this is a provincial law, and until it's in the provincial courts, I really think our federal leaders are waiting to see the outcome of that, because they are aware that so many of their MPs are from Quebec. A lot of their support does come from Quebec. So they really, I believe they're just being careful. Is it right? I don't think so. That's my personal belief. We did see the Prime Minister speak up a little bit more passionately in the House of Commons about Bill 21, stating that it's discriminatory. However, I just read an article in the Star about the Conservative leader telling his MPs to like not speak publicly about Bill 21. So there's a lot of problems in that regard, where politicians are telling their members to not speak publicly on a discriminatory bill. I think that's problematic, and that perpetuates, I'm going to say, Islamophobia. That's my perspective. Amira, would you like to share?
You know, I think what's happening is almost a crisis in imagination and a crisis in communication. So the crisis in imagination is that, let's imagine what happens when we allow systemic discrimination at this level to continue. We don't actually need to imagine too hard, because even in France, where these discussions are happening, where you actually see, you know, Bill 21 as though it were, you know, 20 years ahead, because not only, for example, are, you know, people with religious attire prevented from working in the public service, but, you know, if I wanted to accompany my child on a school trip, I would not be allowed to in that country because I wear a headscarf. Like, that's how far down the road they are already. So Quebec, we know, has a relationship with France, and so that's a very scary thing to imagine. Now, communication wise, what we really need to do, again, is amplify what Quebecers themselves who are opposed to this bill are saying. We need to communicate that. We need to say, look, it's not just the rest of Canada that is outraged. Quebecers in that province themselves, yes, they are not a majority, but I do believe that if people can communicate, the politicians can communicate what's at stake here, what we have to lose when we start treating people like second-class citizens, when we start to dehumanize people, what you said, Sam, earlier, when you know, people are so dehumanized that someone thinks it's okay to ram their truck and kill a multi-generational family. Or just about 5 years ago, when someone walks into a mosque and shoots worshipers, where there was children there, trying to kill as many Muslims as he could in Quebec City in 2017. So we have to communicate that this is not okay, that we respect Quebec's distinct status. We know that there is a lot of history in Quebec, the language, the culture, we respect it, we understand it. We know the trauma with the Catholic Church and that led to the Quiet Revolution. We can understand all of that, but it does not give a license to take away people's fundamental rights and freedoms. That is not Quebec, and that is not Canada. And that's what we just need the politicians to clearly articulate. And so that what we do is we change the hearts. So it's not just 3 million opposed to it, if that's the number, and I've also heard that number, but more and more people start to understand what is at stake and how unfair it is, because all Miss Anvari wants to do is contribute to society. All she wants to do is help fill a teacher shortage. She's there to help Quebec. So why won't the government let her?
It's such trash. I'm so sorry that this is happening. And like, I don't, is there anything else that the two of you wanted to add? We find that the more concise these lives are, the better that they do. So is there anything more you wanted to add that I can help amplify through the project?
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to reiterate what I said at the beginning about if our rights are being infringed upon currently, which Bill 21 is doing, Quebecers who wear religious attire, what's stopping any level of government from invoking this notwithstanding clause and infringing upon your rights next? So it's really important that we all speak up, especially as Quebecers, to speak up to their MLAs or and their MPs to say, we say no to Bill 21 and we would like action on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to say thanks to all the viewers that have been watching this this IG Live. You know, that already is you're participating in the resistance. And there's one thing you do today. It's sign and share that petition, get your voice out there, or talk to someone that you know about this issue. I mean, again, what else can we do than mobilize and resist as much as we can whenever we see injustice? Thanks so much, Sam.
Thank you so much to both of you. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.